So right now, the lore and power scaling of The Incredibles is really popular, as people are finding out about the heroes in the golden age of The Incredibles, notably heroes like Gamma Jack and Universal Man, who we only briefly see on screen in the actual movie itself, long after they've been killed by Project Kronos, but they have a surprisingly deep amount of lore behind them in audio logs, which were released on The Incredibles DVDs. So today, I thought I'd give my own opinions on the power scaling of the Incredibles verse by putting the Parr family, aka the Incredibles themselves, up against another superhero who is incredibly popular right now, and fittingly has a very similar superhero name to the Incredibles. I am of course talking about Mark Grayson, aka Invincible. If the Incredibles and Invincible were to fight, who would actually win? Would Pixar's strongest family defeat the son of Omniman? Let's find out. If you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's jump right in. Now, for this video, I will not be covering any material found within the Invincible comics as to not spoil anyone who cares about that kind of thing, and only be covering Invincible scaling for the first 3 seasons of the Invincible TV show, ending right at the fight against Conquest. If you want my thoughts on this matchup with comic scaling, it will be mentioned here at this timestamp so you know it's coming well in advance. As for the Incredibles, we of course will just be using pretty much all canon material for them, which would be the 2 movies, a handful of tie-in comics, and of course the audio logs that started this wave of recent popularity in the first place. With all that being said, let's begin with the scaling of the Incredibles. Now, if it wasn't obvious, the Incredibles are made up of 4-ish members: Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, Dash, and Violet. I say 4-ish because Jack is there too, and while he has more powers than all of them combined, he is a baby and can't exactly competently fight yet, so I don't think you need me to explain why Invincible could beat up a baby who sometimes has superpowers. As a baseline though, everyone in the family roughly scales within the same ballpark, as all of them to varying degrees of their powers are able to fight against the V10 Omnidroid, all of them at some point either knocking it over, reacting to it, or outright blocking its attacks. Still, there is a clear power hierarchy in the family. Even though he is the fastest, Dash is actually probably the weakest due to having pretty much no strength showings. Next is probably Elastigirl, who with some setup can kind of mess with the V10 Omnidroid by tripping it over ice or launching projectiles at it. The second strongest is probably Violet, mostly due to her shield constructs, which can take direct attacks from the Omnidroid and are used to protect everyone else in the family multiple times. However, the clear and far away strongest member of the family is Mr. Incredible, probably to no one's surprise. Bob not only has the outright best showings against the V10 Omnidroid, trading attacks with it repeatedly and knocking it over with no setup, unlike Elastigirl, but he is just outright stated to be the greatest superhero, essentially immediately putting him over every other superpowered character in the verse. It's here where we again can begin talking about the scaling and feats of other heroes from the golden age of heroes and Project Kronos. If one statement for a data book isn't enough, Mr. Incredible is just outright given the highest threat level by the data of Project Kronos, putting him at a 9.1, with the next highest being Gamma Jack at 7.9. This difference is made obvious when an out of shape and overweight Mr. Incredible is able to beat the V8 Omnidroid, when the far weaker V6 Omnidroid was enough to defeat the next strongest hero of Gamma Jack. So even at his absolute weakest, Mr. Incredible gaps every other hero in the verse. So even as each droid was more deadly than the last, the initial objective by Syndrome was to create an android just even worthy of fighting Mr. Incredible. So the question arises, how strong were the heroes that the previous weaker Omnidroids fought and defeated? First up are Thunderhead and Hypershock. Thunderhead was able to manipulate extreme weather, while Aftershock was able to explicitly create at least magnitude 6 earthquakes with his powers. Both of these guys just have outright worse strength stats than Mr. Incredible, if that wasn't obvious from what I said before, as Hypershock lost to the V4 Omnidroid. Still, being able to cause earthquakes on this scale or to create so-called extreme storms would easily put both of these guys anywhere from town to mountain level in power, which is pretty impressive for 2 guys who got essentially off-screened. Now, for the most part, this is probably the most consistent baseline for the Incredibles, which might already be higher than you expected. Beyond this level though, you have things like the Omnidroid potentially surviving an island-level crash after being launched by a rocket, but the main issue is that no one can actually damage the Omnidroid. They literally defeat it using its own attacks, so this really wouldn't scale to any of the other Incredibles. Instead, the best high-end for the verse comes from this guy, Universal Man. Now, he is not literally universal, but his power is to change his density anywhere from being lighter than air to near that of a black hole. Based on his size, and even assuming he's just getting to 50% of that of a black hole, Universal Man would still be anywhere from multi-continental to planetary in power. This becomes even more impressive for Mr. Incredible because Universal Man was considered a 2.9 threat level and was defeated by literally the first and weakest Omnidroid. At worst, this means that Bob is equal to his level of power, as their durability are considered equal, while Mr. Incredible massively gaps Universal Man in strength despite being able to turn nearly into a black hole. As for speed, ironically, Dash isn't a good measure because his own speed feats are kind of trash. Just having statements that he's the fastest thing on Earth, at least putting him at massively hypersonic plus, as he'd be faster than lightning. Beyond this though, multiple times across the movies, characters have reacted to or dodged lasers from close range, putting them at anywhere from relativistic to faster than light in combat speed at best. I didn't mention it before, but everyone's abilities are super straightforward. Mr. Incredible is strong, Elastigirl can stretch, Violet can go invisible and has force fields, and Dash is fast. But are they invincible? Now, the scaling for Mark in the early parts of Invincible was a bit unfortunate because he was so much weaker than the relevant high tiers of the verse. He'd get beaten up by Omniman, Anissa, Battle Beast, and these fights weren't even remotely close, so you couldn't even say, oh, he was relative to them in power or something. However, this does not mean that he is weak. Mark, in fact, by himself, shows off some pretty impressive feats really early in the series. For example, while it wasn't the Texas-sized meteor that his father stopped, Mark in Season 1 could stop an asteroid that required mountain-level strength to stop and throw away. In the same season, during a casual game of catch, Mark could throw a baseball around the entire planet pretty casually, as well as fly to the moon in a very short period of time, both feats being relativistic in speed, which again, isn't all that bad. However, now that we are much deeper in the show, Mark has gotten massively stronger. At his pinnacle, he's able to not only contend with other Viltrumites, but literally take on the second strongest Viltrumite of them all, Conquest. While it took a massive rage and adrenaline boost to help him do it, he was able to defeat him. This means that at his peak, Mark should scale over his father Omniman, who displayed again moon-level power, both through stopping that Texas-sized meteor that I mentioned, and from pulling a ship out of a black hole. Of course, while at least in space, Viltrumites can fly intergalactic distances at massively faster than light speeds. It's pretty clear though that on planets they aren't always moving that fast. We even see what happens when they do actually move fast, and it destroys everything. As a Viltrumite, Mark just has the standard superpowered enhanced stats and flight from his smart atoms, but besides that, he doesn't really have any unique hacks abilities that we need to go over, besides his rage boost and adrenaline that can push him to the level of power of peak Viltrumites. But will that be enough? Starting from just Season 1 of Invincible, the initial stat comparison is actually really close. Both Invincible and the Incredibles should scale above mountain level in attack potency and have relativistic speed scaling. In that scenario, the Incredibles would probably just win. Mark is just a Mr. Incredible who can fly, but unlike Mr. Incredible, he wouldn't have any backup or support and would eventually fall to the more experienced hero and the rest of his family, who would jump him kind of like a reverse Omni-Man versus the Guardians of the Globe. However, as Mark gets stronger, it starts looking way worse for the Incredibles. By the point Mark scales to Omni-Man, the only way to get to the Incredibles to that level is by using Universal Man. But there are some glaring issues with this feat, namely that it's likely the black hole level power was far weaker than described if he was considered less of a threat than Hypershock, who could create only magnitude 6 earthquakes, especially when his threat level is so much lower. Just think about it like this. Omni-Man stands in front of black holes that are way larger than a person. Meanwhile, the best scaling for Mr. Incredible is maybe being stronger than a human-sized black hole. Because if we're being honest, this fight is really just Invincible versus Mr. Incredible, and Mark's speed and advantage of flight become really apparent as their stats get further and further apart. There's literally nothing stopping Mark from just pulling the entire family into space, something he literally does to characters like Conquest mid could fight. And look, only one of these universes has massively faster than light feats, while the other has characters maybe reacting to lasers. Now, there is a hypothetical prime Mr. Incredible that we never really see, because the modern day one, even after his training, is still not at his prime level, but we have no idea what that version of Mr. Incredible can do. So at worst, by the time of Season 3's finale, Mark shows the Incredibles why he's invincible. If only Gamma Jack had been there. And here are the spoilers for the comic. I mean, come on, bro. They blow up a planet. Mr. Incredible isn't stopping that, bro. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, thank you to my members who got to see this video early, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.